I'd like to say a few words of introduction now about Dr. Milan Zver. As you know, between 2004 and 2008, Dr. Zver served as the Minister of Education and Sports under Prime Minister Janša's government. In 2008, when Slovenia had the presidency of the European Union, he was also the chairman of the Council of European Union for Education, Culture, Youth and Sports. In the European elections of 2009, he received the highest number of preferential votes in Slovenia and was subsequently elected member of the European Parliament. He's member of the Reconciliation of European Histories Group and member of the European Parliament on the Committee for Culture and Agriculture. He's also currently presidential candidate for Slovenia for the SDS. And as I said, the host today, and it's actually thanks to him that this conference is actually taking place, that we're actually giving also a platform to this very important issue of human rights, genocide, and mass atrocities. Ladies and gentlemen, I would ask you to please join me in a very, very warm welcome for Dr. Milan Zver.
Thank you for this introduction. Distinguished Premier, the President of the Constitutional Court of the Republic of Slovenia, ministers, national councillors, Your Excellencies, ambassadors, analysts from Slovenia and abroad, I am welcoming the letter most warmly in Slovenia, and I'm grateful for your arrival. I also have to thank the Institute for Cultural Diplomacy from Berlin for very good suggestions as a co-organizer of the conference, as well as the Executive Director of ICD, Mr. Mark Donfrit, whom I am greeting amongst us. I have to thank the National Council of the Republic of Slovenia and the President of the Government of the Republic of Slovenia. As the former national councillor and the minister in the former government, and presently as the member of the European Parliament, I have so far organized many conferences regarding human rights and freedoms, fundamental freedoms. I am convinced that this conference today, this summit, will at the end lead to a more effective protection of human rights and freedoms. I believe everybody of us agree that our last 2 years in our neighborhood, in the north of Africa and in the Middle East, or in the so-called Arab world, historical changes are taking place. Perhaps the best definition would be that from social evolution, this movement developed into political revolution. Some of that call that Arab awakening or Arab Spring. Certainly these are democratic changes, but these are nevertheless slow changes, or they have not been fully defined. And therefore, many political analysts say that this is, though, a political transition, which is not necessarily, or that will not necessarily be, a democratic transition. If we use the word revolution, we mostly think about violence and violations of human rights. This is especially true of people living in the Eastern and Central Europe, who are very still well remembering the situation after the Second World War. Therefore, we are extremely happy that some 20 years ago, almost without any violence in Slovenia, we went through a political transition practically without any violence into the functioning democracy and full respect of human rights, and therefore we should care about what is going in our Arab neighborhood. We have listened carefully to the requirements of the protesters in the Arab streets and markets and their request to change the authoritarian governments. This has been done at the level of the European Union and in other fora. Unfortunately, many authoritarian governments responded to that with gross violence. It is absolutely unacceptable the very early response by the President Assad in Syria. The regime and security forces responded with extreme rights, gross violation of human rights, involving atrocities and atrocities against humankind, including other forms of violence, which the international community condemned very seriously. The international community is still very divided within the United Nations, unable to find the response to the situation in Syria. It was unable to convince the Syrian government to take up its responsibility to protect its own civilian population. We are in the situation where all the measures for mediation, international aid and prevention have turned out to be inefficient. The international community, in the case of Syria, is facing a serious challenge: how to operationalize the concept of the R2P. This concept has been unanimously approved in 2005 at the General Assembly of the UN, also thanks to Slovenia. And this case of Syria represents an extreme case where the responsibility to protect is at its test, where the first two pillars have not been proven efficient, and that is the responsibility of the country and international aid. The Security Council of the UN is about to take a very serious decision how to prevent further atrocities, as it is obvious that Syria is unable or unwilling to do so. And the time is running out and the number of victims is rising. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe that, as many others, a more efficient mechanism for the prevention of genocide and mass atrocities should be established within the UN and widely. The President of the Government of the Republic of Slovenia, Mr. Janša, has just called us or explained his explanation of the initiative he presented at the 67th meeting of the General Assembly of the United Nations in New York. And therefore, we are on that basis asking for the board of like-minded states to be established. This would be at the level of official government representatives. But in itself, this is not enough. Civil society also has to deal with these questions. And it is doing so. And therefore, this conference, together with ICD from Berlin, has been organized. This is about fundamental human freedoms, humanity, human dignity, prevention of humanitarian catastrophes, and the first priorities among all of human priorities. Ladies and gentlemen, a lot of eminent international law experts are here today. Respectful individuals from various countries who care about human rights, especially basic human rights. I call upon all of you to speak about these issues in your environment, also in non-governmental organizations through which pressures can be exerted on the policies of states in the international community in order to prevent and punish the crime of the genocide in line with the convention. We will be hearing during the panels various views on how this should be done and what mechanisms should be established. I find particularly important the following elements. What problem we are faced with in Syria, what atrocities have already taken place since the beginning of the peaceful protests and their breakdown in March 2011. Over 20,000 mainly civilians have been killed. The violence is exaggerated, as well as the use of heavy artillery and the shelling of urban areas. Mass murders are taking place, both by the government forces and the rebels. A lot of urban areas have been destroyed. They are under siege or being bombarded. Over 4,100 refugees fled to the neighboring country, and there are 1.2 million of internally displaced persons. This speaks about a real humanitarian catastrophe. If we look at the problems, we start with the references to the Arab Spring, but we all know that each Arab country represents its own sui generis case of transition. However, in Syria, we cannot speak about a transition, but about a pure and simple civil war. The situation in the Arab world is dangerous for the entire region and leads us to the enforcement mechanism according to the Convention on the Prevention of Punishment of the crime of genocide. The lack of democratic deficit can lead to repeated conflicts, and there are other deficits as well. First, at the social level is extremely high unemployment rate among the young, which almost in all of these countries is above 20%. This young generation came to the labor market after the democratic boom in the period 1990-2000. And in many Arab countries, this was dealt with the employment in the administration. This could represent a social bump in the future. Also, there are not enough small and medium-sized enterprises, and at the same time, the young generation has a full access to the latest information technology. The next element of instability is increasing level of poverty, very high social differentiation. Then there is a deficit of equal opportunities among sex, and the decreasing role of the intellectuals and women in the Arab societies. In order to change these societies, we have to help these countries. This should involve a general help. In addition to effective mechanisms of prevention of conflicts, which are still not in place, we also need political and social help, as well as cultural diplomacy, which brings additional potentials to help towards a better democratic transition in this world, including the Arab world, which will be focus of our conference today. I wish you successful deliberations in your panels, and thank you for your attention.